Just last month, my family was able to go down to Texas and visit ICR for the first time, and we spent a good 3 hours just going through the facility and watching the presentations, and just a spectacular work. Really enjoyed it. Last year here, we had Brother Frank Sherwin come, and he did a exhibit, if you will, on Mount St. Helens, and that was exceptional. If you go to our church website and go back in the history to last year, you'll be able to see that as well. But we're really looking forward to this week and the next 3 days. And so I'm just going to open in prayer and then turn things over to Frank Barish. Heavenly Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the opportunity to study. And it's our desire to learn and grow. And so I ask that you bless the next 3 days. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning again. We've got before I bring up Dr. Sherwin, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background to our college and who we are. Certainly a welcome. As soon as I remembered, Joe, how to run this on the side. Yeah, leave me alone. All right, there, I found it. Okay. Pastor James said that Pastor Leversey could not be here, and you might want to just pray for Pastor Leversey as he and his wife is recovering from cancer, going through some treatment. And if you get a chance to remember them, please do. We've got a college that is a small Christian college designed around our church. It is certainly a ministry of our church, and we work to push pastors, missionaries, educators, trained up. Now, someone asked me, we were talking just a little bit ago, what's the age group? I'll take you, if you're 15 years old, to 105. So that's the age group. Because we are a church college, a lot of our church members will take classes and things. And so we certainly drive that around there. We are a local community. It's very personable right now. We have a campus on the back side. On typical size, 7 to 10 students a class. Right now, we've recovered from COVID, and we're growing that. So if you know anyone, there is some information on the back on that table that you can certainly grab a hold of and bring on in. We have had our college for 26 years. So there are a few pastors that are in the area that have gone through our college, a few missionaries, and a lot of church members. We work with our other campus areas, and we have a video program and an online program. So if you can't be in our classroom, you can still be online taking classes with us, and of course, watching us through the video. We certainly have a 1-year and 4-year degrees. The 1 year is focused around really giving a chance to see what college is all about, and a Bible certificate behind that. As the Lord wills and grows us, well, we're going to be happy to grow. On our website, this is next semester coming up, so mid-January and such. There'll be more information as we go out there, and these are some of the classes that we'll be teaching in person, along with a lot of our video-based classes. Notice the Intro to Creation Science. That's really where we got tied in with Dr. Sherwin. I gave you ICR a call last year, trying to develop a creation science class for our college. We're not, obviously, a university. We're not pushing out scientists, but we want our pastors, our church members, to have an apologetic approach to understand these elements of creation, so when you get into those conversations, they're ready to know. And they mentioned Dr. Sherwin was in the area. He could come by and speak. We brought him in, a 2 or 3 week notice. Did a 5 o'clock, filled up the place a little bit better than what we've got here. We're learning that the 9 o'clock might be kind of rough for a lot of people. We have the 2 o'clock this afternoon, but still working on that curriculum and building something, and we're just excited to be working with ICR at any capacity. That on the back there is information about how you can reach me. I'm the director of the college, along with, of course, finding out more information. So where are we today? For those that, thank you for coming this morning. You are the early birds. You are the first day. I hope that you can make most every day. You'll see the crowds change as we go into the week. But Dr. Sherwin is going to focus today a little bit more on earth sciences and things. The afternoon will be interesting, the War of the Worldviews. That will look at the different worldviews and really teach us how to communicate. It's amazing to see the challenges we have today working with people that before we took for granted, everyone understood what sin meant. We can't take that for granted anymore. And so it'll be interesting to hear his discussions on that. Tomorrow is Dr. Sherwin's focus, being a zoologist and working with metabolics and life sciences. So you'll want to come back tomorrow for that. I'm looking forward to Dr. Sherwin that 2 to 5 p.m. where science ends and philosophy begins. That's going to be an interesting approach and looking at that. We added the 9 to 12. Now it's out there on the website, and it's on the agenda. As we get through tomorrow and the momentum builds, we're opening that time for Q&A, but he'll be bringing a few spotlight items that we can talk through. So I'm looking forward to really being challenged. And that's the thing that you'll see here today, especially with a smaller group. We'll leave time for questions. And don't hesitate to ask and come on up, and this is your chance. And then, of course, the wonderful oceans. How many have been to ICR in Dallas, Arlington? Do you consider yourself Dallas or Arlington?
Dallas.
The Dallas area. Any of you ever gone to his small handful? If you haven't yet, and if you're in the Dallas area, you've got to. It's a tremendous facility. It's very professionally done. And you get some nice tours between the museum and the planetarium and the items that they have to offer. Dr. Sherwin's been with ICR for, I'm not even sure how many years.
Since 96.
Since 1996. Graduated
1896.
1896. Graduated in 1978. I did too, but I was in high school. Sorry, a little bit behind you. Western State College from Gunnison, Colorado. And then, of course, your graduate work. Dr. Gerald Schmidt that you got to work under. I went and looked up a little bit on him. Impressive individual, Dr. Schmidt was. And that's where you worked on your zoology, I think, right? Graduated in 1985. Okay, I'm catching up with you. I was working then in 1985. And received an honorary doctorate from Pensacola Christian College. My two kids went through Pensacola. We really enjoyed that area. And of course, you've been now with ICR since 1895. So today, and the objective of these 3-day seminars, and by the way, what you'll see out there, he is not only a tremendous speaker, as you'll learn, but he's also an author. And some of the books out there, Dr. Sherwin has compiled, he's co-authored, or he's authored some of them. So take some time looking at that information out there. What we hope to do is a creation science. Now, we kind of built this at I wouldn't say college level. It's open to the community, and but I wanted some depth, but not from a scientific level. So our job is to educate. Our job is to train. Our job is to make sure that when you leave here, you're more equipped than when you came in to have discussions with those who either just think evolution is the way to go because, well, only smart people think evolution is right? So that's our job in this 3-day seminar, to equip you to be able to have that discussion, because what you'll find is the majority of the people who think that evolution is the way to go, well, they just think that. They don't really know why. They have a few things in their back pocket, but a great opportunity to educate and to show them. And that's our primary goal over the next 3 days. We've broken it up to where you'll see a little bit of earth science, life science, apologetics, and then just some good information. So Dr. Sherwin, if you would like to come on up, and I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay, Frank, and if you would let me know when to take the first break.
Okay, we'll do that.
So you just look at me and do the 5 minute,
Really?
Gave a good overview of my background, but got my degrees in Colorado, both undergraduate and then my graduate degree in zoology, invertebrate zoology. My field is parasites. Kind of an unsavory subject, But as I tell people, you don't have to go to France to study parasites. Thank you. So anyway, this morning we're going to go ahead and kick off our presentation by looking at Earth and astronomy and seeing just what Scripture has to say versus what the strange evolutionary naturalist position says. And so let's see. We begin as ICR by understanding that God is not the author of confusion. The Apostle Paul mentions that in Corinthians. God is not the author of confusion. Why? Because he loves us too much. He wants us to assimilate this information and understand. And so that's why I believe the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20 that not only is God's creation seen, but Paul added an extra word. He said that God's creation is clearly seen. Clearly seen. Now, the Sherwin translation of that is painfully obvious. And so we believe that God's word is clear this morning. The Bible is our authority since we can understand it for ourselves. Now, God saved me out of a religion that was very much based on works, and leaders of that particular religion said not to read the Bible. That's actually what they said. Don't read the Bible. We will interpret it for you. And so I went into my late teens believing that until I was on an aircraft carrier over in the South Pacific, and the navigator ministry was active on board the carrier. And they kind of got my number, and I was led to Christ kicking and screaming and got born again as the Lord Jesus says in John chapter 3. But I was still an evolutionist. I believed that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, that his blood washed away my sins. Glory. But I was still an evolutionist. I still was of the mindset that you couldn't believe all that was written in the early chapters of Genesis. Right at that time, about a year later, I was working in the jet engine shop. I was a jet engine mechanic in the Navy, and so going from jet engines to parasites, it's a natural progression. And so I was still an evolutionist until I read a little gospel tract called Have You Been Brainwashed? And it was by some guy named Dwayne Gish of the Institute for Creation Research. And so I read that, and I was shocked. And I read it again, and I read it again. I was standing in the jet engine shop of an aircraft carrier, and I just couldn't believe what I was reading, and it made me both mad and glad. And that's what good gospel preaching should be, right? Make you mad and make you glad at the same time. And so I was mad that I didn't know that there were problems with evolutionary naturalism, and you'll see today that the problems are legion. But also I was glad that you can understand and believe the Bible from the very first verse. From the very first verse. And so I began my odyssey at that time in the jet engine shop of this aircraft carrier, believing God from the very first verse. And so as Frank mentioned, my odyssey in science and all, and doing my graduate work with Dr. Gerald Schmidt, who unfortunately was an atheist. And so when I went into his office as a potential graduate student at the University of Northern Colorado, I asked him if he would be my graduate professor. But because graduate students and their professor are supposed to be like this, joined at the hip, as you learn information from your graduate professor, when I told him I was a Christian, well, he was shocked. And I remember he kind of leaned back and forth in his chair there in his office, and it must have been a minute where he mulled over, should I take a Christian as a graduate student? That's what was going through his mind. And so he finally said, yeah, okay. But he said, you have to believe understand that I am an atheist, and I require all of my students to take a course in evolution. Well, by that time, I was pretty secure in not only my faith, but also in my science. And so I said, yeah, that's fine. So I became the graduate student of Professor Schmidt and shot 35 tree swallows up in the higher altitudes of Colorado. And shot these tree swallows, and then I had to dissect out the parasites. And I discovered a new species of parasite, so I got to name it. And I named it Acuaria coloradensis. Why would I call it that? Coloradensis. That's right, because I found it in Colorado. Science is so easy. So I discovered it in Colorado. And so I got it published in the Journal of Parasitology. And that's probably most of your coffee tables this morning, right? Right next to Reader's Digest, Journal of Parasitology. And so Dr. Schmidt and I worked together for about 2.5 years, and I got my master's in invertebrate zoology and got my research published. And so in doing that, I was kind of showing my friends and my family, most of whom were not believers, that creationists can do science. Creationists can make discoveries. Creationists can get their research published in secular peer-reviewed journals, which is my research is published in. So just by doing that, I was not to boast, but just to show people who are skeptics about creation science that you can do science. We just understand that in the beginning, God, versus in the beginning, nothing. We think in the beginning, God is maybe a little bit more scientific. So that's kind of my background. My odyssey is a creation scientist, and then I've been working with ICR ever since 1996. Prior to that time, I taught at Pensacola Christian College in teaching in the Department of Biology, virtually all of the pre-med courses, anatomy and physiology, medical microbiology, just a whole mess of courses, parasitology, of course, and doing the labs and getting established in my science. So then the Lord took me from PCC over to San Diego, where the Institute for Creation Research was. And I've been with ICR ever since. Well, when words do not mean what they say, religious and scientific authorities become our authority. And as we say in Texas, we're against it. We're against this idea of scientists who are very popular but atheistic in their worldview, attempting to tell us how to interpret science. Back when I was growing up, it was Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan would get on TV and he'd give these presentations and talk about the millions and billions all the time. But we as Christians don't accept the secular worldview of Carl Sagan. We believe that God was there in the beginning. And so you do not need scientific authorities to tell you how to understand the Bible. If there's one thing I could tell people as we do presentations, and that is you don't have to appeal to scientific authorities, or should I say secular scientific authorities, to understand what Scripture says. That's oil and water. Let God's Word speak to you. Remember the Bereans. These, meaning the Bereans, searched the Scriptures how long? Daily. Search the Scriptures daily, whether these things were so, as recorded in Acts 17. And there is a biblical basis for clarity. We don't have time to go through all the verses there. But remember what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 30 and John chapter 14, 15, and 16. All of this addresses what we call the biblical basis for clarity. And if I can emphasize it again, God loves us so much, folks, that He made His Word clear, particularly when it comes to our origins, where we came from. That's why having a succinct worldview is so important. A worldview that I'll talk about this afternoon that talks about where we came from, what our purpose in life is, and then, as Hamlet said, once we shed this mortal coil, where we're going when we die. That should be the Christian's worldview. Your origin, your purpose in life, and your destiny. And the late Henry Morris, the founder of the Institute for Creation Research, said that where you came from is at least as important as to where you're going. And so he addressed that. And so we want to emphasize that biblical basis for clarity found both in the Old Testament, but of course in the New Testament as well. Now, here's my personal biblical interpretation method. Give words their normal meaning in their normal context. I think we could all agree with that, couldn't we? Give words their normal meaning in their normal context, and you won't go wrong. Genesis 1:1 to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 3 is the historical narrative of creation. The historical narrative of creation. Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, all the way through to verse 25. These are the generations of. Now, this is the narrative details of man's creation. The narrative details of man's creation. God went to great lengths to describe our origin, and it has nothing to do with chimpanzees. We have been created in God's image, and we have never moved from that position as ICR. As a matter of fact, these 3 days I'll be speaking, I'm going to address, quote unquote, human evolution. I don't like that phrase because it's an oxymoron, right? What does evolution mean? Well, it means change. So human evolution means, humans having evolved or changed. And that's an oxymoron. That's like saying airline food. That's, okay. Or how about Microsoft Works? Okay, well, anyway. So we look at creation science, and it begins with the beginning, with Genesis chapter 1. It begins, folks, with one who was there when? In the beginning, very good. With one who was there in the beginning in the book of beginnings. Chapter 1 of Genesis is the creation. This is where God goes to great lengths to tell us that he created, and I'll be repeating this throughout the next 3 days, where he repeated after their kind, right? We see after its kind, after their kind, after his kind, variations. But in the first chapter of Genesis, it said after their kind. Now, here's a question for the Bible scholars. How many times do we read that phrase, after his kind or after its kind, in Genesis chapter 1? The answer is 10 times. So 10 times God tells us clearly that he created after their kind. So the question that people usually ask is, well, Frank, what is kind? Well, we believe it's somewhere about the family level. Remember that what you had to memorize in junior high? The kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Well, we believe that the kind that God is addressing is somewhere around the family level there. And we're still researching that. But God created the horse kind and the cow kind. God created the dog kind, the dinosaur kind. We love dinosaurs at ICR. What do we call dinosaurs at ICR? Missionary lizards. They are so neat. And if I had time these 3 days, Frank, I would have talked about dinosaurs because I love dinosaurs. They are just amazing. But 10 times, God tells us in Genesis chapter 1, he created after their kind. So what is God telling us 10 times in Genesis chapter 1? He didn't use evolution. He did not use evolution. It says right there in Genesis 1 that he created after their kind. No mention of evolution. So let's take God at his word right at the beginning. Right at the beginning. God's word is unique, particularly in relation to creation. God's word is unique. Look what it says in Nehemiah chapter 9. Thou, even thou, art Lord alone. Thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth, and all things that are therein, the seas, and all that is therein. And thou preservest them all. And the host of heaven worshipeth thee. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, ladies and gentlemen, right there. That covers creation science, both in this planet and throughout God's universe. Speaking of God's universe, I just want to add this. I won't go down in a rabbit trail, but I just have to add the latest research by the James Webb Space Telescope. Who should be sitting on the edge of their seat watching the displays that the James Webb Space Telescope is taking? The Christian. The Christian who believes the psalmist who said in Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God. And I just get so excited seeing what the James Webb Space Telescope is taking pictures of and just realizing how awesome our God is. Unbelievable. And secular cosmological textbooks are literally having to be rewritten because of the James Webb Space Telescope. Let's move on. The origin of the universe. Let's start with that. The universe, it's a pretty big field. Thank you. Big field. There are only three options for the origin of this universe. Look at them. One is that it always existed. Two, it suddenly appeared from nothing. And door number three, it was created supernaturally. Now, those are the choices that individuals have when it comes to the origin of the universe. There is no other way to describe the universe's origin. Now, the secular scientist, the secular cosmologist, cosmology is a study of the universe. They're in a little bit of a conundrum here when you look at these three choices here, because they understand scientifically the universe could not have always existed, because they themselves say the universe is headed for what they call a heat death. Now, I don't have time to get into the details there, but they say, yeah, the universe is headed for a heat death, and so it could not have always existed. That's the short way of describing it. Well, number two is kind of strange. Suddenly appeared from nothing. Everything from nothing. And then the third one is anathema to the secular evolutionary cosmologist. They will not even consider door number three. That is simply barred to them. And so they have to say that everything came from nothing. Everything came from nothing. And here's what Guth and Steinhardt said in 1984 in Scientific American Magazine, which is no friend of the creationist. Here's what these two secular authors said. Before I read it, I have to say that Steinhardt has stepped away from that position. And Steinhardt, for whatever reason, doesn't believe a lot of what he was saying in the mid-1980s. So it's kind of interesting to study Dr. Steinhardt and why he came away from what he was originally advocating. But here's what they said, 1984, quote, "It is then tempting to go one step further and speculate," well, that's a good scientific word there, speculate, "that the entire universe evolved from literally nothing." Everything came from nothing? Now, I don't want to park too long on that, but my question is that scientific? Can you say scientifically that everything that we see here today, both on this planet and out in the cosmos, came from nothing? In other words, what I'm asking this morning is there an experiment that we can conduct? Let's go into a 21st century laboratory. Let's put on a white lab coat. That's important. Put on that white lab coat and then adjust the whistles and the bells in an attempt to show how we can show or manifest something coming from nothing. What would you do? What piece of equipment would you reach for? Get a box of nothing. It's kind of hard to describe that. So what does it take to believe that everything came from nothing? Faith. Well, it's more faith than I have. Okay, I have faith in one who was there when? In the beginning. The evolutionist doesn't believe that in God, and so the evolutionist has to believe that everything came from nothing. Well, in Psalm 74 it says, "Yours is the day, yours also the night. You have established the heavenly lights and the sun." And there's that picture of the James Webb Space Telescope that I was talking about. An incredible piece of equipment. When was it launched from the Caribbean? On Christmas Day. I love it. December 25th, 3 years ago. Well, the idea that the universe had a distinct beginning and is definitely winding down, that's that heat death I was talking about, winding down today is a serious philosophical concern for the secular cosmologist. That's what keeps her or him awake at night. Again, the idea that the universe had a distinct beginning and is definitely winding down, a heat death, is a serious philosophical concern for the secular cosmologist. Well, this is a little bit of an extended quote, but I want to share it with you because it is exquisite in their implications. And this guy, Szurik, is not a creationist. He is writing in, look at the publication there, New Scientist. New Scientist is a British publication, and it is death on creation science. They have no good thing to say about creationists, which they believe is anathema to the quote-unquote scientific world, because we appeal to a creator. But anyway, Michael Sliznik said in just 2015, just 5 short years ago, science also teaches us that the laws of physics are ridiculously, almost unbelievably fine-tuned for you and me. Take the electromagnetic force. It has a value that is perfectly set for getting stars to bind protons and neutrons. That's what we learned about in junior high. Remember that? Protons and neutrons in the nucleus of an atom. To create carbon, the building block of life. And I have that in block letters there for a reason. Carbon is very, very important. The building block of life as we know it. Or the strong nuclear force, which binds the insides of protons and neutrons. If it were even a tiny bit stronger, the whole world would be made of hydrogen. If it were weaker, there would be no hydrogen at all. In either case, life as we know it wouldn't be possible. Fine-tuning, it's exquisitely fine-tuning, folks, that we are here. And I would suggest this morning that fine-tuning requires a fine-tuner. A fine-tuner. His name is Jesus. His name is Jesus. Well, here's that carbon molecule. As a zoologist, I've learned a lot about carbon. You hear a lot about carbon. For example, the sugar. Do you remember the sugar molecule you learned about in high school? C6H12O6, that's sugar. And it's a monosaccharide. Then 2 monosaccharides hooked together gives you a disaccharide. And we have disaccharides out there on the coffee table. It's called table sugar. Disaccharides are very important for energy. That's how God created our body, to use energy, is to break down that di, meaning 2, disaccharide into 2 monosaccharides, then go through the various processes that produce energy, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So the solar nebula and accretion model for Earth has problems in explaining how Earth got its abundant water, and we'll be talking about that these 3 days, and correct carbon content. Too much carbon, and Earth is more like Venus, which is called Earth's twin, which is kind of funny because there's nothing like Venus and Earth, but they still call Venus Earth's twin. And too little carbon, which would be more like Mars. And here we have it. There's Venus, and Venus is impossibly hot. It's even hotter than Mercury, and Mercury's closer to the sun than Venus. But Venus has incredibly hot surface temperature. There's Mars. And everybody's going nuts about Mars, and that's great. I'm all for scientific exploration, but not when they start using billions of dollars to try and verify or justify life out there. There is no other life out there. Life is unique to here, terra firma, the earth. And I'm personally against spending a lot of tax dollars to try and find life. They never will. Life is simply too complex to come about by time and chance and natural processes. But there's Venus and there's Mars. What's in the middle, class? Earth, you bet. And Earth, what did Goldilocks say? Earth is just right. It's just right. Not too much carbon, not too little carbon. It's just right. Genesis 1:1, God's word is certainly unique. Any cosmologist will tell you our universe is composed of 3 entities or 3 parts, and they can be as secular as a day is long. But they all agree that the universe is composed of time and space and matter or energy. And that's what Einstein was saying. He said E equals mc squared. What he was saying was that matter and energy are interconvertible. You can interconvert them. Matter and energy. So we live in what we call a time, space, matter, energy universe. I have no problem with that. As a matter of fact, we can say that we live in a tri-universe. The prefix uni means what? Anybody? It's just us here this morning. One, you bet one. So, what is a unicycle? Yeah, don't pull a wheelie on a unicycle. Thank you. And so we live in a tri-universe, right? A single universe is composed of time and space and matter in a single universe. Can we say this morning, Frank? Can we say 3 in 1? Wow, that's kind of interesting. 3 in 1. Okay, so how many world religions begin like Genesis 1:1? And this is a point we're making, not that we're denigrating other religions. That's not the purpose of ICR. That's not what we do. But we have to say that according to the Bible, that begins with God existing, right? The Bible begins like no other world religion. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is a profound scientific statement. I say that sometimes I've had formal public debates with evolutionists. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. We don't do it anymore. But I always try and mention that Genesis 1:1 is the most scientific statement I have ever read as a zoologist, as a scientist. Let's see now, let's go ahead and dissect that one verse, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, what's that? That's time. God created the heavens. What's that? That's space. And the earth, matter and energy. So folks, in the first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the book of books, God, who has always existed, we don't try and explain where God came from. He has always existed. God has spoken into existence. We call that an ex nihilo creation. Time and space and matter. So God was there in the beginning, and he spoke into existence time, space, and matter in this tri-universe. So if you can get that, you can get the idea of what creation science is all about. God was there in the beginning. We don't have to explain where he was. And in the very first verse, he explained what he did. And that is, how do we say it in Texas? Awesome. That's awesome. And this is what an individual is saying from the University of Rochester. He said this just 2 short years ago. University of Rochester. He's an evolutionist. He said the inflationary universe standard model that guides cosmology says nothing about cosmic origins. And that's the inflationary universe that they appeal to. The birth of space, time, matter, and energy is simply not there in their cosmological model. But it is for creation science. And we just explained that. And so I think that's an interesting quote from the University of Rochester. You have those 3 entities, time, space, and matter, that's spoken into existence in Genesis 1:1. Well, this is a picture maybe some of you have seen before, showing that the earth is supported on the backs of really big elephants that in turn are standing on a really, really big tortoise. And it's been called the world turtle or the cosmic turtle, and it's found in Chinese and Hindu mythology, which is somewhere around the oldest book in the Bible. What is the oldest book in the Bible? God bless you. Probably the book of Job, right. Probably the book of Job. I wouldn't die for that, but I think it's pretty well established. Job is the oldest book in the Bible. Why is that significant? Well, because, oh yeah, and have to ask, what is a turtle walking on? That's a good question to ask. And one lady asked a cosmologist, a secular cosmologist, what's the turtle walking on? And the cosmologist got angry and said, lady, it's turtles all the way down. Hey, can we have fun this morning? I hope so. Oh, I hope so. All right. So how did Job know this? What was Job saying at the same time of this Hindu mythology and all? He said something a little bit different. He said in chapter 26, he, meaning God, stretcheth out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon what, class? Nothing. I love that verse. I love that verse. He stretches out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. No mention of any cosmic turtle or elephants. God hangs the earth upon nothing. And sure enough, when the astronauts went out beyond Earth, they saw a beautiful blue marble hanging on nothing, just as Job said in chapter 26. So, evolution in the beginning says nothing. Now, I was racking my brain trying to figure out what would I put as a picture of nothing. And I figured, well, this is it right here. If you try to think too hard about nothing, you'd go nuts. So the evolutionist says in the beginning nothing, not to make fun of them, but that's what they believe, that there was nothing in the beginning. And we would have to go from there to ask the evolution the question of, was there a Big Bang? ICR does not subscribe to a Big Bang. We don't believe that's how God did it. As a matter of fact, God doesn't really tell us how he did it there in the opening chapters of Genesis. But as Peebles said, and he is a Nobel Prize winner in physics, he is an evolutionist, and he said that the Big Bang theory describes how our universe is evolving, not how it began. And I wouldn't put that quote up there, except he's a Nobel Prize winning physicist. And I think he knows what he's talking about. And so he said it doesn't explain the beginning. He said how it's evolving, or as I like to tell people, that when you ask an well-meaning evolutionist and atheist, where did everything come from? They inevitably say 98% of the time, they say the Big Bang. And that's wrong according to the inflationary model. That's wrong according to evolution, not according to what we say is creationist. And so I have to gently tell, very diplomatically, lovingly tell the individual, well, the Big Bang doesn't explain the origin of the universe. And this is important. The Big Bang only supposedly or attempts to explain the expansion of the universe expanding. And there's a big difference between trying to describe the origin of the universe versus what the Big Bang describes, allegedly, the expansion of the universe. Those are two very different facets there. And so the Big Bang only explains the expansion of the universe, or as this individual says, how it's evolving. He went on to say just about 6 years ago, the Big Bang connotes the notion of an event and a position, both of which are quite wrong. He continued, adding, there is in fact no concrete evidence for a giant explosion. And so evolutionists like to hang their hat on the Big Bang because they have nothing else to go by. We, on the other hand, believe somebody who was there in the beginning. So there's problems with the standard Big Bang model. We don't have time to go through it this morning, but there's what we call the horizon problem, if you're taking notes. There's also the smoothness problem. For decades, a suite of studies have all found that the cosmic structure is not clumpy enough for what we see in the universe, and so they call that the smoothness problem. And number 3, the flatness problem. So those are 3 very serious problems with the Big Bang cosmology: horizon, smoothness, and flatness problem. And then don't forget Guth and Steinhardt's work in Scientific American in 1984. Well, what happened before the Big Bang? And this is where I like getting in discussions with individuals as I try and point them to a creator, that in the beginning, God. What happened before the Big Bang? Cosmologists, those who study the universe, are unsure what happened before this moment. And that's a good statement. That's a good statement. They are unsure what happened before this moment. They maintain there was a Big Bang, but they really don't know what happened before that. And this was said just 3 short years ago in space.com, which is not a creationist website. What really happened at our universe's birth? So the very beginning of the universe remains pretty murky. And that's a good quote there. Not that we're making fun, but they simply don't know 3 years ago the beginning of the universe. It remains, and by the way, it will always remain pretty murky. A guy by the name of Turner, writing in Live Science way back in the year 2025, said, and I quote, "Our model of cosmology might be broken." That was just this year. They're saying that this model of cosmology might be broken. A new study reveals the universe is expanding too fast for physics to explain. It's expanding too fast for physics to explain. And that's thanks to a lot of work that was done by the James Webb Space Telescope. This a European organization said way back in September, late September of the year 2025, they said Earth scientists often face huge challenges when researching the Earth's history. Many significant events occurred, such as a long time ago, that there is little direct evidence available. I salute them for being intellectually honest and saying there is little direct evidence available. Certainly that's true. We're talking about a universe that is allegedly billions of years old. So evolutionists can get away with telling stories such as the following, and here we go. Here's an evolutionary origin story from Chu of Massachusetts Institute of Technology back in the year 2025. She said, billions of years ago, the early solar system was a swirling disk of gas and dust that eventually clumped and accumulated to form the earliest meteorites, which in turn merged to form proto-Earth and its neighboring planets. Well, I think you can see, ladies and gentlemen, that there's no way to validate this statement scientifically. We can't go back in time and observe what happened. And remember that empirical science means what we can observe. I would say 75% of empirical science is nothing more than observation, observing an event. And then testing and repeating are also part of empirical science, none of which can be done. This statement must be taken by faith, Man said in Live Science 6 years ago, the Earth is not, by the way, in some privileged spot at the center of the universe. Well, the question is, how does he know that? We're not even sure how big the universe is. And so he said, and he's simply giving his philosophical interpretation at the center of the universe. The Copernican principle has never been proven, and in the most general sense cannot be proven. And the Copernican principle is the idea that there's nothing special about Earth or its place in the universe. And so they can believe that if they want to, but it hasn't been proven, and in a sense cannot be proven. So that's an interesting statement to be made there. One individual said in Scientific American, quote, in a stunning surprise, almost all the newly discovered solar systems look very different from our own. Now, this brings us back to the state of Arizona, where last year I was in Arizona with ICR, and we went up to an observatory. I forget where it was here in Arizona, but we went up there at night because we were invited to see a certain event that was going on. I think it might have been a meteorite or something, and they were tracking it. And so as we were waiting in line up in this area at this observatory here in Arizona, I was talking to a PhD cosmologist, an astronomer. She had just recently got her PhD, and I was talking to her about this, our unique solar system, that the 4 rocky planets are found in the inner solar system. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Those are the 4 rocky planets, the inner rocky planets of our solar system. And I was asking her, how unique is this to have these 4 rocky planets, which includes Earth and Mars, so close to our sun that we are exhibiting such a prime real estate, if you will, cosmologically speaking. And as I was describing this to her, she was going like this. She was nodding her head nonstop about how unique this particular solar system that we live in is unique from all the other solar systems that they have been discovering. And she had no answer, and that's fine, I understand that. But this is very, very unique. And we have the really big planets out there, like Saturn and Jupiter, that are running interference for us. Because big planets, even though they're what they call gas giants, they have quite a significant gravitational attraction. So that when the comets and asteroids come into our solar system, they are pushed away or pulled forward in such a way that Earth is not pummeled and peppered by meteorites and comets. I hate it when that happens. But anyway, we don't experience that. And one of the main reasons is these giant gaseous planets that have such a strong gravitational attraction. Thomson, evolutionist, said in March of 2019, according to a new simulation, our home system is even weirder than we thought. Even weirder, that's a good scientific word. Even weirder than we thought. So when you look at our solar system, it is so totally unique. Earth is unique, obviously, but and our solar system makes it even more unique. Our solar system is, in some sense, a bit of a freak and not the most typical kind of system that nature, capital N, nature cooks up. And this was from UC Santa Cruz back in 2012. Evolution of life from non-life is not clearly seen. Paul says that God's creation is clearly seen, but evolutionists have no idea how organic life, carbon-based life, came from inorganic non-life. And that's what they have to believe, that somehow inorganic non-life, through time and chance and natural processes, became organic life. Evolution of life from non-life is a faith that unknown chemicals came together in an unknown way, at an unknown place, at an unknown time, using an unknown process to produce life. And so, when you read stories about the evolution of life, they usually say, well, there was step 1, 2, 3, and then life. But the evolution of organic life from inorganic non-life is shot through with very significant difficulties. And for the evolutionists, they're still at square one. They're still at square one. There's just no way to get out from under the thumb of good science that shows you cannot get the spontaneous formation of organic life. Unfortunately, due to billions of years of erosion, plate tectonics, and volcanism, we've lost the vast majority of the ancient rock record on Earth. So we're never going to know exactly where or even when, to be honest, life originated on Earth. That was just 5 short years ago. They don't know where and they don't know when, but they know that life evolved from non-life. But look at what's listed at the top portion of this quote here. Billions of years of erosion, plate tectonics, and volcanism. Well, they've been finding dinosaur trackways, fine imprint dinosaur footprints that extend for 20, 30, 40 yards of dinosaur footprints, and it looks like they were made just yesterday. But yet, they're given impossibly long ages of 114, 130 million years. Now, a million of anything is a lot. except for dollars. But to say that you have 114 million years of erosion, and by erosion I mean like you see here, plate tectonics, volcanism. You have all sorts of comet impacts that you would have in 114 million years. You would have tsunamis, you'd have heat waves, you would have a flood, tornadoes. You just go down the list there. And those dinosaur trackways managed to avoid all of that. Remember, it's the secular geologists that say that this crust of the earth is very dynamic as erosion continues nonstop all those millions of years. How can you have those dinosaur trackways so pristine in such a long stretch if all of that is going on? You can't have both. So it looks like those trackways were made just thousands of years ago. How was the solar system built? Well, you might also think that these disparate bodies are scattered across a solar system without rhyme or reason. Here's the point. Move any piece of the solar system today or try to add anything more, and the whole construction would be thrown fatally out of kilter. Richard Webb then asks this rhetorical question. So, how exactly did this delicate architecture come to be? And again, this is from New Scientist, no friend of the creationist. How did this delicate architecture come to be? That's a great question. This is where the creationist raises a hand and says, I know. I know. So that is, I think, very significant because the moons that are orbiting these planets are in a synchronous orbits in a way that is choreographed. And so you have all of this occurring. And remember, it was Sir Isaac Newton that was the first one to really begin to put together the choreographed nature of the known planets at that time and how they're interacting with one another. And he gave glory to God. Astronomers have searched the entire Milky Way, the galaxy that we live in, to identify the safest places to live. It turns out, this lady said this 4 years ago, it turns out we're in a pretty good spot. I can't help but laugh when she says something like that. We're in a perfect spot. You think about the Milky Way galaxy, we're about maybe 1/2 to 2/3 of the way out from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy has a supermassive black hole in the center. Massive black hole in the center. And then it is populated by lots and lots of stars around that area. Then you go out into one of the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy, and that's where you find our solar system. And our solar system is what I just described there. But we find that the solar system is such that we are far enough away from the supermassive black hole, and far enough away from this high concentration of stars in the center of the Milky Way that we don't get blasted by X-rays and cosmic rays. And those kinds of rays would just ruin your day. But also, we are able to see out into the universe. And as the psalmist says in Psalm 19:1, that the heavens declare the glory of God. If this planet were so much closer to the center of our Milky Way, we wouldn't be able to see a thing, and we would be microwaved as well. So it turns out we're in a pretty good spot. Well, what about biological evolution? How are we doing for time, Frank?
I would say we're at 10:15, so another 15 minutes.
Another 15 minutes? Sounds good to me. Okay, let's look at the doctrine of God that is not compatible with Darwinism. So this is a point we're making when it comes to biological processes. Christianity says the creator of nature is God. His workmanship is clearly seen, as I mentioned about Romans chapter 1, but also Psalm 19 as well. And so this is Christianity compared with Darwinian evolution that says nature, and nature's always capitalized for the secularist, nature creates itself. Life's apparent design is imposed by nature. Interventions of God are undetectable, so they simply dismiss God. And they say, we cannot detect God, which goes against what Paul says in Romans chapter 1, that God's creation is not only seen, but it's clearly seen. And so this is a good comparison and contrast between these two competing worldviews that I'll talk about this afternoon. Interventions of God are undetectable. This is what how the evolutionist dismisses creation science. Well, is death good? Evolutionists say yes. But we would say that a death-driven means to good is incompatible with Christianity's doctrine that death is a curse and enemy. That's how we view death, a curse, an enemy. Death was never part of God's original creation. Man was created to live how long? Forever, forever. But our first parents, Adam and Eve, fell, as we read in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 1, where Satan came along and said, did God really say that? And so, yes, death is a result of God cursing the earth. And this death-driven means to good is certainly incompatible. And so we would say, no, death is not good. As a matter of fact, Steve Jobs, who died of pancreatic cancer years ago, Steve Jobs said, death is very likely the single best invention of life. It is life's change agent. Well, that's what Steve Jobs said, and that's not what Scripture says at all. What did Darwin say? Well, after his visit to the Galapagos Islands, Darwin began to doubt the existence of a loving God. In a complete about-face, he came to see death in one generation as opening doors of opportunity for the next generation. What had been ascribed to the creative power of God, Charles Darwin credited instead to the creative power of struggle and death. Look what he said in the latter part of his book, Origin of Species, published in 1859. He said, thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the production of higher animals directly follows. So he's given this death-driven worldview when it comes to biology. But we don't say death is good. Death is simply a result of the tragic fall of our first parents. In 1859, the Western world was turned upside down by the publication of this infamous book by the naturalist Charles Darwin. It turned the Western world upside down, not because it was so scientific, but because it explained creation without a creator. It explained creation without a creator. That's why Darwin's book was popular in 1859 and why it's still popular today. Ironically, the very title of his book is called The Origin of Species, but he never describes what? The origin of the species. And so this is from Homer Smith's book, From Fish to Philosopher, and he was no creationist, and published in 1953. The non-biblical worldview attempts to validate the fish to philosopher idea, molecules to man, fish to philosopher, or particles to people, but consistently validates the creation model instead. Gradual evolution is also known as phyletic gradualism. It states that large change, macroevolution, is merely the operation of small change, microevolution, which operates gradually and more or less continuously over relatively long periods of time. And that's what Homer Smith was talking about. That's how he said people came from fish. And then, of course, the fish came from invertebrates, animals without a backbone, which came from metazoa, protozoa, and then finally non-life itself. And so this is where the evolutionist would describe the origin of birds from dinosaurs. And so this is a heavy-tailed theropod dinosaur here. I always like to say heavy-tailed theropod because the theropod dinosaurs were all heavy-tailed. And so I simply emphasize that. Heavy-tailed theropod dinosaurs, like T-Rex. And through time and chance and genetic mistakes, through the alleged millions and millions of years, we find that the theropod dinosaur became the chicken. And in Texas, we say, I'm agin it. Okay? I'm agin it. I don't believe the science points to that at all. that birds have always been birds and dinosaurs, and missionary lizards have always been dinosaurs. As a matter of fact, if I could emphasize one thing this morning, dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. I have quotes from no less than 10 evolutionists, 10 of them, none of which are sympathetic to creation science, and they all have said they don't know where dinosaurs come from. Let me emphasize that. They don't know where dinosaurs came from. They don't know the origin of the dinosaurs, and I'm not criticizing them. That's not what we do at ICR, but we would say dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs, and the reason why when you dig down in the fossil record, you find 100% dinosaurs, you never find their evolutionary ancestors. You just find dinosaurs. Well, this comes from a textbook by Hickman, and back when I was an undergraduate in zoology, we used Hickman and his two relatives. It was called Hickman, and Hickman in our introductory zoology class at Western State College. And this is the 19th edition, published way back in the year 2024. And they said phenotypic gradualism was controversial when Darwin first proposed it, and as a year 2024 is still controversial. It's still controversial. And may I add something this morning? It will always be controversial. It will always be controversial. What about the vertebrate fossils? Well, bats have always been bats. And right here in Arizona, you have a plethora of different kinds of bats, like the little brown bat, Mexican free-tailed bat. You've just got all sorts. I love bats. I love to study them. But bats have always been bats. Fossil bats are 100% bats and show no intermediates. Supposedly, you had rodents that received just the right genetic mistakes, getting zapped by x-rays or whatever, that turned the front legs into what, class? Wings. So bats are the only flying mammals. They're not birds, they're mammals, of course. And somehow those front legs of rodents millions of years ago started to evolve into the wings of a bat. The oldest known fossil bats are from Wyoming and Europe and date back to the Eocene epoch about 50 million years ago. There's a kind of a shale, which is a sedimentary rock called Eocene shale. 1,000 fossil bats have been found in Eocene shale, 1,000 of them. Guess how many are intermediates? 0, none. So the first time you find fossil bats in the fossil record, what are they? They're bats. They're a very profound thing to say this morning. They're 100% bats. And bats make up 20% of all mammals. So every fifth mammal is a bat, okay? So bats have always been bats. Okay. Thank you. How about rodents? Well, rodents are 40% of all mammals. They have undergone, according to two secular mammalogists, Cox and Hautier, they said an extraordinary radiation that is termed a mystery and supposedly are derived from a single common ancestor that lived at least 57 million years ago. That's right around the Eocene time, Eocene epoch. But the point is simply this. Do you see when they say a common ancestor? Well, the common ancestor is not known. The common ancestor, folks, please write this down, is unknown. Creationists are scientists, despite what evolutionists say, and a good science theory, a good science model, if you will, can make predictions. A good scientific model can make predictions. So, based on the creation science model, we would say that the common ancestor of any of these creatures will never be found. So there's a lot of appeal to a common ancestor, but they never tell you what the common ancestor is. Why? It's never been found. They don't know what it could possibly be. So this common ancestor lived allegedly, we don't believe in all those millions of years, by the way, and that's the way it is. We would say that these mammals, especially the rodents, have always been rodents. 40% of all known mammals. When I was at a evolutionary conference in Dallas back 10 years ago now, I saw this book, The Evolution of Rodents, sitting on a table being sold. I did a standing broad jump of Olympic proportions to that table to get that book. Nobody else is buying it, I'll buy it. I would have paid twice as much if that's what they are asking for. Folks, this book is a gold mine for creationists. A gold mine for creationists. Here's a quote that I got on page 4 of Hautier and Cox's book. This is on the introduction. They said, and I quote, "Indeed, from a quick look at the fossil record, it is easy to get the impression that rodents have always been rodents." And I'm going, yes, that's exactly it. I love it. Page 4 of an overtly evolutionary publication is saying exactly what creationists have been saying. Based on the creation science model, rodents have always been rodents. What did I say about dinosaurs? Dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. I'm not exaggerating. Get you 10 evolutionists, leading evolutionists who don't know where dinosaurs came from. Rodents have always been rodents. Bats have always been bats. Dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. Fish have always been fish. Chimpanzees have always been chimpanzees. The laundry list is endless. What about the invertebrates? I show clams here. And the reason why I show clams is for good reason. Let's do, we got 3 minutes. Let's do something real quick. Let's just be hypothetical and take the person sitting next to you and blindfold them. And then have them choose 100 fossils completely at random, okay? So they choose 100 fossils from the fossil record. They can go to different continents and fill their bag with 100 fossils. And they're blindfolded. They don't know what they're choosing. Statistically, 95 of those 100 fossils are clams. Clams. Or in zoology, we call them marine invertebrates. But since it's just us here this morning, let's call them clams, okay? So the fossil record is a record of clams. It's clams at the bottom of the fossil record, clams at the middle of the fossil record, clams at the very top of the fossil record, and it's all clams from side to side. Just clams. Lots of clams. A whole bunch of clams, just clams. Okay, do you get the idea? 95% of all the fossil record clams. What does that mean? Well, that means 5% of the remaining fossil record is everything else, like fossilized plants, like mammals and reptiles and fish and frogs and amphibians and dinosaurs. Dinosaurs make up a whopping less than 1% of the fossil record. Ironically, when you talk to people and you mention the word fossil, what's the first thing that comes to their mind? A dinosaur. But dinosaurs make up less than 1%, much less than 1% of the fossil record. And when you find them, what are they? Dinosaurs. There we go, dinosaurs. So shrimp have always been what class? Shrimp. This is from 2010, 15 years ago, 360 million years old. Look at this, 360 million years old, and what is it? It's a fossilized shrimp. What's this? A delicious shrimp. I love shrimp. Every time I see a shrimp like that, there's one thing I think of. Okay. But the article in November 9th of 2010, PhysOrg article, they said that these fossil shrimp that they found were buried rapidly and catastrophically, like you would get with a flood. A flood could do something like that. Look at this. Shrimp have always been shrimp. Suddenly, catastrophically buried like you get with the flood. We would say, without hesitation, just thousands of years ago. Shrimp have always been shrimp. Jellyfish have always been what class? Jellyfish. Lawrence, Kansas. Scientists have ascribed the oldest definitive jellyfish ever found. It's 94% water. Using recently discovered fossil snapshots found in rocks more than 500 million years old. 500 million years old. They throw these time scales around, but when you look at it, it's 100% jellyfish. This is the jellyfish fossil. It was, when it was alive, 94% water. Folks, what would you have to have in order to find a well-developed fossilized jellyfish? It would have to be suddenly and rapidly and catastrophically buried like you get with a A flood. Somebody said it, a flood. 94% water. So this is indirect evidence. It's not proof, but it's evidence of the sudden and rapid catastrophic burial of it. So not only does it show it happened rapidly, we believe that jellyfish have always been jellyfish, and this was buried, we believe by faith, during the Genesis flood 4,500 years ago. So the flood was about 4,500 years ago. How long did the Genesis flood last? Don't say 40 days and 40 nights. How long was the Genesis flood? A little over a year. Little over a year. How long was the rain? 40 days and 40 nights. And so here we have a jellyfish. It's always been a jellyfish, even though they say it's a 500 million years old. We say no, it's only about 4,500 years old. This is my field. This is my thing right here, insects. Because I'm a parasitologist, I study how parasites are transmitted between animals or between people. How do people get malaria? Mosquito, right? Mosquitoes, okay? And how about those big roaches they have in Arizona? Not as big as the ones they have in Texas, of course. And so roaches have always been roaches. As a matter of fact, insects have always been what, class? Insects. What's amazing here is that we find fossilized insects at all. They're not like fossilized bones or anything. These are insects. They have an exoskeleton. They don't have any internal type bones or anything. But the fact that we have these insects here indicates, wow, they must have been buried fast. Can I give something here real quick and you can write it down? It's what I call the 4 F's. The 4 F's. Ready? Floods, form, fossils, fast. Floods form, fossils fast. Why do we find fossilized jellyfish that are 94% water? It's because floods form fossils fast. How is it that we find all these fossilized insects here? It's because floods form fossils fast. Even though they have no bones or anything, they are exquisitely preserved. Unbelievable. Insects have always been insects. Floods form fossils fast. Pterygote insects appear abruptly. This is according to evolutionist by the name of Dudley. He said this in 2011. Appear abruptly in the fossil record with no obvious transitional forms. A 1-2 punch in this one quote. Not only do they appear suddenly as 100% insects, as predicted by the creation science model, but there's no obvious transitional forms. Again, this is what creation science is saying. This is why I get so excited doing presentations like this, because Scripture is true. And so the Pterygota is a subclass that comprises almost all insects, and they appear abruptly in the fossil record. This is why we love fossils so much as creation scientists. It documents the sudden appearance of all these animals and plants with no intermediates. No intermediates. This is a dragonfly fossil, a 2.5-foot wingspan, huge. We believe this is buried by the Genesis flood. We believe that by faith. I cannot prove to you that this is found in Genesis flood sediments, but we would maintain it is. There's no fossil evidence that dragonfly flight evolved. Fossilized and living dragonflies share the same structure, showing no sign of millions of years of evolution. And so dragonflies have always been dragonflies. Are very big in the pre-flood world as 100% dragonflies. So one more thing and then we'll take a break. And please write this down. The fossil record speaks of death, not development. The fossil record speaks of death, not development. The fossil record speaks of extinction, not evolution. The fossil record speaks of extinction, not evolution. If you can memorize that, you've come a long way in understanding what creation science is all about. The fossil record is a record of death due to God sending a worldwide flood 4,500 years ago that lasted a little over 1 year. And it results in a lot of extinction of creatures that we don't find today. But it certainly does not document evolution. The fossil record speaks of death, not development, extinction, not evolution. So please notice, and then we'll take a break right here. Creationists say because of the fossil record creation. Have you seen these last couple of minutes, folks, that I've been showing you these fossils, and it shows that the creation model is true, no intermediate forms or anything? And evolutionists say in spite of the fossil record evolution. So we would say because of the fossil record, they say in spite of the fossil record. My question we'll take a break is, which is more scientific? Which is more scientific? Okay, thank you, Frank. So, yeah, again, when it comes to the fossil record, the record of the sedimentary rocks, it shouts creation. So this is, I think, very important slide here. Help me out. Let's review. The fossil record speaks of death, not development. The fossil record speaks of extinction, not evolution. Okay? And so we would say because of the fossil record creation, evolutionists say no, in spite of the fossil record evolution. And so remember that the trillions of fossils that we find embedded in the sedimentary rock units are laid down by running water, like you would get with a flood. A flood could do something like that, yeah. So what are the different kinds of sedimentary rock? Well, there's sandstone, limestone, and shale. Those are the three major sedimentary rocks: sandstone, limestone, and shale. Sounds like a law firm. There's also mudstone and mud rock. There's all sorts of variations and varieties of sedimentary rock, but they're all unique in that they have been laid down by running water. So that is what we would maintain as creationists. Okay, so let's see, Frank. Let's move on. And so I would like to just kind of end the portion of what I was talking about in this last hour. And I put James Arness there because the members of my church in Flower Mound, Texas, they say I look like James Arness. And so when the pastor, who's my age, is getting up and making announcements, sometimes I'll be speaking, and he'll say, we're going to have James Arness come and speak. And so that's what I put there. But this is a Bible verse that I made just a few fine points too, if you want to write this down. Now, evolution is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links not seen. So that's a little bit of a variation there of what we find Paul mentioning in the scriptures. And so you can write this down. The missing links are missing. The missing links are missing. Okay, so that brings us to the Scopes monkey trial, Dayton, Tennessee, 1925. And what were the implications, both scientific but also social implications of what occurred at this time? Well, let's give some background. For example, who was John Scopes? He was a 24-year-old substitute teacher in Dayton, Tennessee. And he was charged for teaching evolution that violated Tennessee's Butler Act that was put together in 1925. He was recruited by the American Civil Liberties Union for a test case symbolizing science versus religion. And today in the 21st century, you still hear that tired argument that this is an issue of science versus religion. I wish I had a nickel every time I heard that phrase. I'd be one rich man. After the trial, left-leaning Scopes became a geologist, and he wrote later that he never taught the chapter on human evolution in his memoir, Center of the Storm, that was written in 1967. Scopes later died in the early 70s. And so the textbook that he used was a civic biology, and that was written in 1914. The standard high school biology text, it covered evolution, zoology, botany, eugenics, which I think is very interesting. Certainly you don't see that anymore. The evolution chapter described human descent from simpler species that, as mentioned earlier, violated the Butler Act of Tennessee. Scopes taught from it, sparking a trial as a test for academic freedom. And we have come full circle, as we'll see, in regard to that. So he was charged with the Butler Act, and so with violating the Butler Act, and I just thought I would mention what the Butler Act actually says, since this was such a big deal. It shall be unlawful for any teacher in any of the universities, normals, and all other public schools of the state which are supported in whole or in part by public school funds of the state, to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from lower order of animals. And so I read that and I think, you know, I agree with a lot of that. I don't agree that only one side of the issue should be taught, and we'll get into that in a bit there. So this is what Scopes said, and this is a quote that I'll keep going back to. I believe that the Dayton trial marked the beginning of the decline of fundamentalism. I like to think that the Dayton trial had some part in bringing to birth this new era. So that's what Scopes said. So he said that I believe that the Dayton trial marked the beginning of the decline of fundamentalism. And here is some interesting statistics from the Pew Research Center, October of just a few years ago. The religiously unaffiliated share of the population, consisting of people who describe their religious identity as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, now stands at over a quarter of the population, up from 17% in 2009. And I remember, folks, back when I was in high school in I remember that about 1% of the population identified themselves as atheist. 1%. And that was back in the late 1960s. And then it went from 1% to 17% in 2009. And now, as 2019, stands at 26%. Both Protestantism and Catholicism are experiencing losses of population share. Currently, 43% of the United States adults identify with Protestantism, down from 51% in 2009. So this is kind of what we're running into. As Jake Meador, the editor-in-chief of the quarterly magazine Mere Orthodoxy, notes in a recent essay, about 40 million Americans have stopped going to church in the past quarter century. That's something like 12% of the population, and it represents the largest concentrated change in church attendance in American history. So people are leaving the church in droves. And that was said in just 2 years ago. Education, you know, said John Scopes, means broadening, advancing, and if you limit a teacher to on one side of anything, the whole country will eventually have only one thought and be one individual. Then he said this, I believe in teaching every aspect of every problem or theory. Do you agree with that? I absolutely agree with that. I also believe in teaching every aspect of every problem or theory, which includes evolution. And it's critical because they're using my hard-earned tax dollars. And so I think that all sides should be taught, especially when it comes to evolution. Clarence Darrow, the atheist who was representing Scopes, he said it is bigotry for public schools to teach only one theory of origins. Who said that? The atheist Clarence Darrow, who is representing Scopes. And again, we would have to agree with that. It is bigotry for public schools that are using our tax dollars to teach that only one theory of origins. Let's go ahead and have the students be exposed to both sides of the story. Now that evolutionists have the upper hand in public education, are they willing to dialogue? And the answer is no. For example, in February 2024, just last year, Wesley J. Smith highlighted how mainstream science seeks to stifle opposition instead of encouraging open and honest debate. Again, Scope's words are coming back to haunt the evolutionist because he said, I believe in teaching every aspect of every problem or theory. In the 21st century, a teacher cannot teach students the problems with Darwinian evolution. If a teacher started teaching the class in American public schools, now class, I want you to understand there's some very serious problems with evolution, that individual would be brought before the principal, probably the school board, probably put on probation, and then if he or she continued to teach the problems of evolution, they would probably be fired. Such is the situation now in America. Nor can they teach an alternative to evolution, even if they do not mention the Bible. So a teacher can say, now there is an alternative to evolution, which does not include Darwinian slow and gradual processes. This particular model states that life appeared abruptly in the fossil record, the abrupt appearance model. So a teacher could teach that without ever mentioning a single verse in the Bible, without even mentioning the Bible itself, but just presenting an alternative to evolution. And again, that person would be disciplined. In addition, they must teach evolution. So if a person is hired to teach high school biology, one of the first questions usually that is asked is, are you willing to teach evolution? Yes. Are you going to teach it as a fact? Oh, I don't know. You must teach evolution as a fact. And so that's the situation now. You've got to teach evolution, and you've got to teach it as a fact, and you may not mention any alternative to evolution, and you may not talk about the problems of evolution, because now they're beginning to say that if you teach there are problems of evolution, that is tantamount to teaching creation. And really, the students are not stupid. They're not dumb. They know that if they're being taught that there are problems with the only model of origins that they're hearing, well, if evolution isn't true, if there are all these problems with evolution, then, and what do you suppose they'd say? Maybe there's an alternative. Maybe the Bible is true. Maybe creation is true. So students should be taught that dissent within science is healthy. This is what I used to teach at Pensacola Christian College when I taught the variety of science classes, specifically biology. It is healthy to teach dissent within science. That's how science grows and builds. When you have coworkers saying, well, wait a minute, Dr. X, did you think about this? Or Dr. Y, do you see that you said this, but really it's this? And so that's why we say dissent within science is healthy, because they can fine-tune each other's model there. And that also includes evolution. And by the way, let me say this. There is a big problem with creation. Okay? You've heard it here, right here in public. I'm telling you, there's a problem with creation. There's no creation if there's no creator. There's no creation if there's no creator. Well, is design a valid concept? Evolutionists don't like the word design. Why is that? Because it means a designer, okay? And so engineering means an engineer. If something is architecturally designed, there might be an architect. And so this is why they don't like the word design. None other than Louis Agassiz, known as for his contributions in empirical science. Empirical science is that which we can observe and test and repeat and falsifiable. Louis Agassiz and Charles Darwin felt that design, look at this, was a legitimate scientific concept. Who believed that design was a legitimate scientific concept? These two individuals. Darwin theorized that the very first forms of life were the result of design. And Richard Dawkins, we've all heard of Richard Dawkins. Dawkins said, he's the evolutionary atheist, has theorized that DNA might be the result of design by space aliens. So Dawkins actually said that. But it's what we say at ICR, and you can write this down, these three letters. You ready? A, B, C. A, B, C. anything but creation. Anything but creation. So here Richard Dawkins can talk about DNA from space aliens as long as you don't mention the Bible, as long as you don't mention creation. In other words, anything goes. Who was it? The Nobel Prize winning scientist, Francis Crick. Francis Crick was a British atheist who helped to discover the spiral helix of the DNA molecule, and he and Watson received jointly the Nobel Prize in chemistry, in science, for the spiral helix of the DNA molecule. And Crick, who was a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, he died about 12, 15 years ago. He's not an atheist anymore. But Crick said that he understood how very, very sophisticated and detailed the DNA molecule was. And he realized that the DNA molecule was so detailed, so sophisticated, so complex that Francis Crick, the atheist, understood that DNA could not come about by time and chance and natural processes, which is what evolution is all about. So you would think, here it is, a Nobel Prize winning scientist who helped to define the DNA molecule is saying that you just can't have something like DNA show up naturalistically. You would think he would pack up his tent and become what? A creationist. But he was an atheist. That was his worldview. He couldn't become a creationist. He was too embroiled in denigrating creation scientists. So what was he to do? He was on the horns of a dilemma. He understood the nature of the sophistication of DNA, but he was not willing to say that DNA was created. What to do? Well, he put together a theory called directed panspermia. Directed panspermia, that's a fancy phrase meaning that in an unknown region of space, an unknown group of beings from an unknown planet, an unknown time period ago, shot a rocket ship full of DNA directly towards Earth. Earth is very, very, very tiny. And so this advanced civilization would have to spend no expense into shooting this rocket ship with DNA directly at Earth, billions of years ago. It finally entered the Earth's atmosphere, released its huge cargo of DNA, and that's how life got started. Directed panspermia. And so, in other words, ABC, anything but creation, as crazy as that idea is, it beats the idea of, or the model, that in the beginning, God. And so, this was Francis Crick, and Richard Dawkins is saying basically the same thing. ABC, anything but creation. Well, it was mentioned about Venus, and so I wanted to mention Venus because it's one of the 4 inner rocky planets of our solar system. Soviets sent probes to Venus 18 times because of scientific curiosity and political ambition. They wanted to be the first to send a rocket ship to Venus to explore it, and it is unhospitable with a capital U. It is so hot on the surface of Venus. And I salute the engineers and the scientists who put together these space probes going to Venus because they had quite a job. And one of the things that prevented the Soviets from getting better pictures of the surface of Venus, you would never guess unless you followed this very closely, it was the cover caps that would go over the lens of the cameras for the landers of Venus. And as much as they tried, they couldn't get the caps off of the lens of these landers. Time and time again, they couldn't get it off with all of the landers that they sent. They did get some pictures of Venus, but not as many as they wanted to because of that one little hiccup. It's kind of amazing. Political ambition. They wanted to be the first, as Soviets, as communists, to show the world communist technology. They gathered comprehensive data about Venus, which ironically is called Earth's twin, that has virtually nothing to do with Earth, except it's in the same neighborhood orbital neighborhood as Earth, but the two couldn't be more different, where the skies boil and the clouds rain acid. So the Soviet Union's investment in Venus research, Venus might host life, it said in 2020 in Scientific American. New discovery suggests the unexpected atmospheric detection of phosphine, a smelly gas made by microbes on Earth, could, and that's the key word there, could spark a revolution in astrobiology. Astrobiology is purely theoretical. In other words, it's looking beyond Earth to the various planets and all of the other structures out there looking for life. As far as we know, life is unique only to Earth. But it has a whole new field, or a relatively new field, called astrobiology. You can even get your PhD in astrobiology, which is amusing because there has been no life found beyond Earth. Well, spaceflight.com said 5 years ago, quote, "The trick here is that we don't actually know what specific life form it is on Earth that produces phosphine found in our swamps and marshes. They don't even know what it is. It is believed, that's the key word, it is believed to be microbiotic, potentially Escherichia coli. Escherichia coli makes up a whopping 1% of our microbiome in our large intestine. And so it was a big deal 5 years ago of unexpected atmospheric detection in the cooler clouds, quote unquote, of Venus. But that's kind of thrown cold water on it because they don't even know what microorganisms produce phosphine here on Earth. So it's extremely, extremely theoretical. Well, Earth's twin. Out of all the planets, it's Venus that's the hottest of the planets, not even more hot than Mercury. Venus rotates the opposite way, clockwise, or retrograde, contrary to evolutionary theory. So Earth's twin, really we should put that in quotation marks. Nothing could be different between the two. So Earth is unique in sharp contrast to all that we see, for example, the exoplanets, solar systems, etc., in the observable universe. Earth is so incredibly unique. So what are the evolution creation opinions? Well, in past decades, there has been a significant shift from the philosophy of uniformitarianism. When I was in college, that's all it was taught to the science majors, uniformitarianism, slow and gradual change spanning hundreds of thousands and millions of years, particularly in the area of geology. Uniformitarianism to the biblical model of catastrophism. So I always choose Grand Canyon here. I've been to Grand Canyon a bunch of times. As a matter of fact, I've lost count how many times I've been to Grand Canyon, which is here in northern Arizona. But let me tell you, Grand Canyon is some of my favorite spots. I love Arizona. I absolutely love Arizona. And I don't say that about other states I go to, but I do say it here in Arizona because it's a beautiful state. I love your state. And so when I joined ICR in 1996, they volunteered me to take groups down from the Bright Angel Trail on the south rim of Grand Canyon, take them 1 mile down of switchbacks to the Colorado River, and we would study Grand Canyon from a catastrophist point of view. And I had a fistful of 3x5 cards with my notes on it. And as we would go down these switchbacks, as we get to various kinds of layers, starting with the Tapete sandstone at the bottom, and we would get to the various layers, I would give lectures about how each one of these layers indicates it was catastrophically deposited by running water. And I enjoyed myself thoroughly as we studied Grand Canyon from two worldviews. One worldview says a little bit of water over vast periods of time. The other worldview says exactly the opposite, a whole lot of water over a short period of time. The evolutionists teach and continue to teach that Grand Canyon, as we see it, this vista, this most incredible geologic formation in the entire earth, was carved by the little Colorado River, sand grain by sand grain, being carved out through millions of years. And yet we see these vertical walls here, which belie that interpretation. If you want to see something that takes a long time, look at the Mississippi River Delta. No vertical walls there at all. But as we study Grand Canyon, we come to the conclusion that a whole lot of water carved this out in a short period of time. Well, this is the evolutionary time scale here, and there's two ways to interpret this. Just like there are two ways to interpret Grand Canyon formation, a lot of water, short period of time, and the other is the evolutionary interpretation of a whole lot of time and a little bit of water. It's the same situation here. Now, I've talked about this morning, about the evolutionary time scale, showing you that really, what do we find in terms of fossils? What's the most common fossil to find, class? Clams, right? Clams at the bottom, clams at the top, and clams from side to side. Now down here, this is a Cambrian and the Precambrian, and you find marine invertebrates. Marine invertebrates, that's a fancy way of saying what? Clams, very good, clams. But it also has one of my favorite invertebrates, marine invertebrates, and that's this little guy right here. That's called a trilobite. And trilobites there are dozens and dozens of families of trilobites, each family containing a genus of different kinds of trilobites. Trilobites are what we call arthropods. Arthropods are creatures with a paired jointed appendages and a chitinous exoskeleton, just like, for example, the Texas roach. All right, that has paired jointed appendages and a chitinous exoskeleton. But with the trilobites here, trilobites are unique in that you find a whole bunch of them. Some only got to be the size of your thumb, some got to be the size of the span of your hand. But whether they're small or big, they're all trilobites, all very, very sophisticated. As a matter of fact, scientists have been able to uncover trilobites, and they found that the trilobites were so well preserved because they were suddenly and catastrophically deposited, like you would get with a something like a flood. They were so well preserved that they were able to take that trilobite fossil and take a cross-section of it to see the structure of their eyes. That's how well preserved it was. Of course, it was all mineralized, but the fact is that you could see the mineralized remains of the eye, and scientists with a physics background were able to determine how the trilobite could see. What was amazing was the trilobite eye was designed by the master designer, the Lord Jesus, to see through the water-air interface. And it's nothing simple about that at all. And so they have been able to determine the eye structure that was amazingly sophisticated and complex. But the evolutionists say, no, the trilobite is one of the first creatures to evolve from non-life, as we see here in the Precambrian back many millions of years. But the creationists have a different interpretation, and I would say a superior interpretation of that. The trilobites and the other creatures you see here are all what we call ocean bottom dwelling creatures. Ocean bottom dwelling creatures. So if God sent a worldwide flood, what would be buried first? Ocean bottom dwelling creatures, like, for example, the trilobites. And we find trilobites in this ecological zone. Creationists call it a theory of ecological zonation. And so we would find within these ecological zones trilobites. Trilobites have always been trilobites, and we find them in a vast variation. I have no problem with that. They're still what? Trilobites. Same thing with dinosaurs. We have all sorts of dinosaurs, but they're still dinosaurs. They didn't come from anything else. And so the evolutionists, unfortunately, give millions and millions of years to these various levels that we see. What is a second way that we could interpret the alleged millions and millions of years of this time scale here? Well, I would say the Genesis flood. We would say that this isn't 450 million years of time, This is a record of the Genesis flood that occurred about 4,500 years ago. The flood itself taking a little over 1 year. And so we find that all these creatures are suddenly and catastrophically buried. We talked about the trilobites already. Here are the insects that I mentioned. Remember that? Insects have always been insects, you bet. And so here is the dinosaurs here. Dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. There are no missing links. As I said earlier, the missing links are missing. So this idea of uniformitarianism has fallen upon hard times, because catastrophism over and over again seems like a better explanation. With the publication of his book, Principles of Geology, Lyell downgraded God's work in creation and on earth during the Great Flood, replacing it with slow and gradual processes acting over long ages. The Bible supposedly had essentially been disproved by this guy, Lyell, James Lyell. Unfortunately, Lyell's influence didn't stop there. He met and mentored a young but disillusioned seminary student turned amateur naturalist by the name of Charles Darwin, and arranged for him to join a scientific exploration trip around the world as its onboard naturalist. Darwin carried Lyell's book with him on the HMS Beagle's voyage around the world and acted as a geologist for the bulk of the trip, interpreting landforms and fossils through a long-age uniformitarian lens. Well, this brings us to plate tectonics, and I don't have time to get into the details of plate tectonics, except to say that we have different kinds of tectonics, the movement of the Earth's crust, in terms of what we call subduction, lateral sliding. By the way, if you're as old as I am, you remember how people talking about the big one in California, the big earthquake that's about to strike California. And they've been saying that now for decades. It's just around the corner, the big, big earthquake. It's going to devastate California and do what? California goes into the sea, right? That's what I remember being not taught, but this is the feeling of a lot of people that have a geology background. But if you read the literature, they're not saying California is going to have an earthquake and fall into the sea. Basically, what's going to happen with the big one, if it ever does occur, is that you'll have in the middle slide there, lateral sliding, and that you'll have a massive sliding of the San Andreas fault that supposedly will happen. They have no idea when. It's like Betelgeuse. Have you ever heard of Betelgeuse, the star, the red supergiant? They call it Betelgeuse, but it's more proper to call it Betelgeuse. And they say Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse is going to explode any time now. It's going to go supernova, and you'll be able to see it in daylight sky. Well, they've been saying that for decades. And so they don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow or 10,000 years from now. They just don't know, because it's really just kind of a guess. And then the third type of plate tectonics is the spreading that you see here. You might have read about what they call seafloor spreading. There are 6 types of empirical, testable data which imply significant horizontal movement of coherent lithospheric plates during the Genesis flood. And that quote is from Dr. Tim Clary of ICR. Dr. Clary suggests that the best explanation of all available geologic data supports rapid horizontal plate movement during the flood. The catastrophic plate tectonics model, and that's what we adhere to at ICR, the catastrophic plate tectonics model, further offers a mechanism for the flooding of the continents, the subsequent lowering and drainage of the floodwaters, and the cause for post-flood ice age. Well, so much more could be said about this, but when you look at this seafloor spreading, catastrophic plate tectonics, when you have the subsequent lowering and draining of the floodwaters that is coming off the North American continent, this takes us back to Grand Canyon. How was Grand Canyon formed? Well, nobody is there to see it occur, and of course, Grand Canyon is not mentioned in Scripture. But it looks like in the latter parts of the flood, latter stages of the flood, as the floodwaters were receding off of the North American continent, it carved out Grand Canyon in the space of just weeks, maybe months. Evolutionists say, no, that's unscientific. It took millions and millions of years. But everything that we see in Grand Canyon indicates sudden and rapid erosion that we can see, plus the fact that it's very difficult to find where all that sediment went to because it was so rapid that the sediments are carried out into the Pacific Ocean, not slowly and gradually, which would have had a lot of sediments building up right at the end of Grand Canyon there. We don't find that. So slowing plates support high flood boundary. This is what Tim Clary is talking about in one of his articles, and he mentions this evolutionist and his co-workers here. His name is Dalton, and they said this way back in the year 2025 in their research. They didn't say this portion here. This is what Tim Clary is saying. Flood geologists have predicted that plate motion slowed at the end of the flood year, and now conventional scientists like Dalton and his fellow researchers are finding it to be true. And Dalton is not talking about the Genesis flood. He's talking about the plate motion that as finding to be true. Dalton and her team of researchers unknowingly found evidence to support the catastrophic plate tectonics model. That's the key. They unknowingly found evidence to support catastrophic plate tectonics, which is part and parcel of the flood model. Well, when it comes to dating the fossils that we've been talking about, there is a significant part of circular reasoning. This is called a tautology. The fossils are dated by the rocks, and they know the age of the rocks because they found the fossils in them. Okay, so one dates the other. And again, it's called a tautology. And in debates, when creationists bring this up, the evolutionists get very, very upset and say, no, that's not what we're doing. I want to quote from an evolutionist. His name is Richard Milton. He is a geologist. He's not a PhD geologist, but he wrote a book. And he's not a creationist. He said, no other scientific discipline would be permitted to ever consider such procedures like we see here, this circular reasoning. But when those who study fossils, they're called paleontologists, date rocks by means of fossils, they do so with the authority of Darwin himself. And the guy who said this is not a creationist, Richard Milton. I've had email communication with him. Well, is it circular? Here's what Harvard paleobiologist Andrew Knoll said in 2005 in Discover magazine, which is no friend of the creationist. Andrew Knoll said this, and he is a teacher at that little Bible college called Harvard. He said, a great achievement of the 19th century science was learning to use fossils, look at this class, as distinctive time indicators. Well, there you go. There you go. An evolutionist out of Harvard is saying that, yes, a great achievement of 19th century science was learning to use fossils as distinctive time indicators. So Knoll himself said this out of Harvard. That allowed, he said, this wonderful scale to come into being. There you have it. In 1999, Trevor Palmer, an Englishman who's an atheist, wrote this book called Controversy, Catastrophism, and Evolution, talking about uniformitarianism and catastrophism. In geology, catastrophism is the theory that the Earth has largely been shaped by sudden, short-lived, violent events, possibly worldwide in scope. What does that sound like? It sounds like the Genesis flood. Is it any wonder that catastrophism is met with such resistance in the secular community? Back when I was in high school, I never heard about anything called catastrophism, that everything was slow and gradual, as uniformitarianism says, slow and gradual processes. Nobody in the secular scientific community believed in catastrophism. But that changed in the 1980s. What happened in the 1980s that caused many evolutionary geologists to take a second look at uniformitarianism? Well, it was a father-son team who were looking at the Yucatan Peninsula there in the Gulf of America. And they were looking at the Yucatan Peninsula and they said, you know what? It looks like there was a giant asteroid that hit the Yucatan Peninsula and caused a complete and utter devastation of the earth through this great cloud of debris after it hit the Yucatan Peninsula in the Gulf of America. And this devastation was so complete that it caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. And they came up with the idea that's what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. So now all of a sudden, since the 1980s, a father-son team, their name is Alvarez, came up with the idea that the dinosaurs were destroyed, killed by this giant asteroid impact. Here's my question this morning. Is that giant asteroid impact, is that a worldwide event? Anybody? It's just us here. Yeah. It's a worldwide event. It hit the Yucatan Peninsula, caused all this devastation, killed all the dinosaurs. A very selective extinction, by the way. Didn't kill much else, just those pesky dinosaurs. But the point is, now all of a sudden, they've come up and they're joined at the hip with the creationists who say, yeah, there was a worldwide catastrophe. What do we call it? The Genesis flood. So for centuries, the evolutionists held us at arm's length. We don't believe in a worldwide catastrophe. Then the 1980s came along, they go, you know what? It looks like a worldwide catastrophe. And now they're agreeing with the creationists. There was a worldwide catastrophe, but they say it was a giant asteroid impact, and they say it was 66 million years ago. We say, no, it was a worldwide flood that occurred 4,500 years ago. What is the point? The point is they all of a sudden have forsaken uniformitarianism because of the physical evidence. They weren't reading their Bible. They don't believe the Bible. But because of the physical evidence, they said, yep, looks like a worldwide catastrophe. The creationists are going, yeah, exactly, a worldwide catastrophe. We call it the flood. They call it a giant asteroid impact. But what is common to both models is it was worldwide, in effect, and devastating. And that's what's kind of exciting that's happened since 1980. This contrast with the gradualism or uniformitarianism, according to which slow incremental changes, such as erosion, brought about all the Earth's geologic features. Well, again, I think creation science, catastrophism, wins head and shoulders above uniformitarianism. The Genesis flood explains the formation of trillions of fossils. What is that 4 F's that we mentioned? Floods, form, fossils, fast. Floods form, fossils fast. And so when we look at what occurred 4,500 years ago when God sent a flood, it says in Scripture, the fountains of the great deep burst forth. There must have been all sorts of volcanic activity with this renting, this ripping of the earth's crust, releasing all of this energy in the terms of water released. We would say that the worldwide mountain-covering deluge would have deposited most of the world's fossil-bearing rock. Fossil-bearing rock is rock that is called sedimentary rock, sandstone, limestone, and shale. Also mud rock and mudstone. But the worldwide mountain-covering deluge explains the evidence that we see a whole lot better than evolutionary naturalism. By the way, this goes way back to the year 2025. In 2025 study published by Geology, a publication, secular publication, found that sedimentary rock laid down by water, can form as a little as 35 years. Just 35 years. Before this, conventional geologists thought that these types of rock took vast amounts of time to erode, consolidate, and lithify. Lithify means to turn into stone. Now all of a sudden they're looking at the evidence and saying, oh, looks like just 35 years. Folks, I can't tell you how incredible that is. Again, these are secular evolutionists who are saying this. what they discovered along the coast of Scotland caused them to quickly change their minds. And so Owen and his fellow authors said this just this year. Just 35 years is all it took. While conventional geologists might be shocked by these findings, flood geologists are not surprised. It justifies the fast processes we have been claiming all along. We've already found that sedimentary material can be deposited how? Quickly. Quickly, that's the flood model. It's rapid, it's quick. But now we have observational evidence that these deposits can go through entire rock cycle, that is erosion, sorting, deposition, and become fully lithified, that is turning into stone, in a matter of just a few decades, making deep evolutionary time unnecessary. These are exciting times, ladies and gentlemen, to be a Bible-believing Christian. When you start running into empirical evidence like this, just this year, I wish that this auditorium were 10 times filled with people, because God's people need to hear this. This is amazing. This is good stuff. This is empirical evidence that needs to be shouted from the church tops. That the flood model is valid. The flood model fits. The flood model is what we see going on over and over again. And by the way, I found this amazing too. Just all sorts of discoveries have been made that helps to validate the creation science model. Often people studying these regions, these mountain regions, have assumed that they are just sitting there, that they're not changing very much. An evolutionist geologist by the name of Knight said. But he said, our study shows that we can have quite dramatic changes over a time scale of a single lightning strike. How long does it take for lightning to strike? Millions and millions? No. A fraction of a second. A fraction of a second can do all sorts of significant geologic work. And then Oskin said in Live Science back in 2013, these mountains are far more dynamic and changing far more quickly than we realized. So in other words, when you have mountain ranges there that looks like they've just been sitting there for millions and millions of years, that's wrong. Because mountain ranges also get zapped by a whole bunch of lightning every year. Every year. And lightning does a lot of erosion in a very, very short period of time. These mountains are far more dynamic and changing far more quickly than we realized. Lightning strikes can cause all sorts of very significant erosion in a short period of time. Well, I wish I had more time, but time marches on, and I do want to share with you some of the books we have out there in the book table. First of all, if you know somebody who is either a senior in high school or in senior high, or somebody that is going to college or a university and is going to be a science major, I would ask that you would get them what I call the Creation Pack. And this is the Creation Pack right here. First of all, this is my dear friend and mentor, Gary Parker's book called Creation Facts of Life. Gary Parker is also a geologist and a biologist. He has his PhD, and he loves the Lord Jesus. So Gary wrote this book way back in 1980 and has undergone revision and addition since that time. And this, out of all the books in the table out there, this is the most important book right here. If somebody says, Frank, I just have enough money for one book, get this book. Because in this book, Creation Facts of Life, Gary Parker talks about Darwinism, as I addressed here this morning, but he also talks about life coming from non-life that evolutionists adhere to, and he shows why that can't possibly be true. Gary Parker also talks about fossils. This is where I got the phrase, floods form fossils fast, you bet, fast. Gary is the one who mentioned that first. He talks about Mount St. Helens, which is an outdoor creation science laboratory. He talks about Grand Canyon. If you thought, am I mentioning Grand Canyon? No, there might be something to that. Get Gary's book, because Gary goes into detail about Grand Canyon formation. What better place than us here in Arizona having a book about Grand Canyon from a creation science perspective. This is it right here. So Grand Canyon, Mount St. Helens, fossils in general, Darwinism and the impact that Darwin made. It's all in this very, very readable book. The thing I love about Gary is he is a good author. He writes in a very engaging writing style. This is illustrated. This will keep that student who's going on to college or university, who's going to be a science major, on the creation science path, and it starts with this book. Now, Gary doesn't go into too much detail about some of the parts that he mentions here, and this is where these two books come in handy, or should I say booklets. Creation Q&A. The most often asked questions about creation science and their answers, both biblical and scientific, are in this booklet here. Answers to 32 big questions about creation evolution, such as, who were the cavemen? Look on page 4, men who lived in caves. And so you get all sorts of answers to questions like that. And so this is Creation Q&A 2. So this is another 32 questions that are answered from a biblical, scientific viewpoint. So 64 questions that people most often ask about creation evolution together in these two little booklets, together with Gary Parker's book, Creation, Facts of Life. Another question in the second book is, where did Cain get his wife? Well, I'd tell you if I was able, but those are some of the questions that you could get answered here. Now, you cannot have the creation pack, that I call it, the creation pack, without also getting dinosaurs in the Bible. What do we call dinosaurs at ICR? Missionary lizards. Missionary lizards. Remember, dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. My favorite dinosaurs are the sauropods. Sauropods have the long neck and the long tail. They're herbivorous, and they got to be really, really big, like Argentinian saurus, which got to be around 60 tons of steaks and roast. So they were really huge, but dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. So when somebody is going to college or university, or they're in senior high, this is a book to have along with the creation pack here, because dinosaurs are mentioned, and people always ask about dinosaurs who are skeptical about creation science. So here it is. This is a creation pack. Get 2 or 3 of these and then give them to your niece or nephew, grandchild, as they go off to college or university. This is the creation pack. This is what they need. Also, we have creation basics. And this is for somebody in grade school, upper grade school, and junior high, and high school. This is a profusely illustrated book of creation basics. This shows the student that creation science is a superior alternative to Darwinian evolution. And so we call it the basics of creation. And it's well illustrated here. This is what gets a person started in creation science. So they would graduate from this book here to the creation pack here. Then if they're going to be a science major, then I would urge them to get this book, Creation Basics and Beyond. Creation Basics and Beyond. There's no illustrations here. This is just article after article of creation science, much as like what you've seen in the this morning seminar. Lots and lots of material. And so Creation Basics and Beyond is the book to get for those who are contemplating being a science major. And then speaking of fossils, this is a book that late John Morris and I wrote about 15 years ago. It's called The Fossil Record. And again, I can't emphasize enough how the fossil record supports creation science. And so John and I put our heads together and we wrote this. I never had so much fun writing a book as I wrote in this. This is a coffee table book. This is what you would put in your living room, and it has beautiful, beautiful illustrations of the various fossils and all, with good, easy to understand explanations for the fossils that all point back to the Genesis flood 4,500 years ago. And so when I was an undergraduate, I worked at a radio station in Gunnison, Colorado, KGUC, playing all the hits all the time. Well, it was an easy listening radio station, so news and weather, easy listening and all that. And I would spin those plastic platters. What are those things called you put on a turntable? What are they called? A record, that's it, a record. People would call me up at the radio station and say, Frank, would you play the fossil record? I said, no, we don't play rock music. And boom. Anyway, so this is a fossil record. This is what John and I wrote. It has been revised and updated since its first publication there. What part did I write? I wrote the appendix, the last about one-third of the book there. And here it is. And so this is what I wrote here, the appendix. And what I did was to take all the so-called missing links that evolutionists mention, and I took each one of those that I could find. I'm sure that some evolutionists have other examples, but the ones that I could find, I answered using nothing but evolutionary literature, evolutionary material. In other words, so any one of the so-called missing links I mentioned in the appendix here, evolutionists say, this is a missing link. And I would say, no, it's not, for these 3 to 5 reasons why. And then I would quote their own evolutionary colleagues, where they said, no, it's not. That's why I had such a blast writing at least the last one-third of this book here. But you'll enjoy this. This is a coffee table book, and if you like keeping up with the creation evolutionary controversy, then read the appendix. The appendix has got some really, really good material. So also we have what is called the Ocean Pack here. And ICR has sent out some literature for the oceans, and I just happened to have written a book called The Ocean Book. And I feel like I'm an authority on it because I went on 2 cruises with my uncle in the Pacific, the South Pacific, my uncle, Uncle Sam. Thank you. Anyway, and so I felt that I was an authority to write this, and this has undergone a new, revised, and expanded publication here of the Ocean Book. And again, I enjoyed so much writing this book. So you'll enjoy reading this to your kids, your grandkids, even your great-grandkids, or your pretty good grandkids. They will enjoy looking at this textbook here. It's not textbook. It's a very well illustrated. Also, you have to get the DVD along with this Ocean Book here. So you have the Ocean Book, and then you have the Mighty Wonderful Oceans. These go together as a pack, but also you would not be able to get the DVD and the Ocean Book without getting Dr. John Morris's book, The Global Flood. I love this book. John went overboard, so to speak, in writing this book showing the case for a Genesis flood. And so it's very, very readable, and you'll enjoy reading The Global Flood. These go together. And then more recently, back in the year 2025, we put together this book on sea creatures. I happen to write maybe most of these articles on sea creatures, but this goes together very well with the global flood and the mighty, wonderful oceans. And so this is what I call the Ocean Pack. You get the global flood, the Ocean Book, and then the DVD and the most recent sea creatures that point clearly to creation. So you got a lot of books to choose from. Some of you guys, if you're like me, I've been married a long time now, 45 plus years. But if you're like me, you know, your wife will say, look, we only have enough money in our account to buy one book. And that, my wife told me that all the time. So I understand that, guys. If your wife says there's only enough money in the account to buy just one book, I empathize with you because that's what the boss says to me all the time. So if there's only one book that you could get this morning, these are the 5 books I'd get, okay? Get the Ocean Book, you get the Global Flood book, then of course you got to get the Creation Basics and Beyond and Creation Basics. You've got to get all these books. And finally, the most important one is the Fossil Record. This is good. This is a coffee table book. So those are the books that I have available on the table out there. Frank, what do we have next?
Okay, we have a few minutes for any. Many, I'll just come on, not many of you here, I'll come on by with questions. Does this work? Yes. It does? Ooh.
I've heard a lot in the past. I haven't heard much lately about dinosaur footprints over human footprints. Is that a legitimate? Is that a legitimate answer for people? Is that really happening? Look, we have dinosaur prints over human.
Okay, yeah, human dinosaur prints are from in Texas and all that.
Right.
I would say, if push comes to shove, I'd have to say no. Because when John Morris first wrote, and this is why science is so important, because science is self-correcting, isn't it? So we should be able, as scientists, if we make a mistake, to announce that it is a mistake and to go on from there. And so it looks like that these so-called human prints that were found through continuous erosion of the limestone shale turned out to have three-toed claw marks in the anterior portion of the so-called human prints. Well, there's an old saying in paleontology, if it's got three toes, it's a what? It's a dinosaur. If it's got three toes, it's a dinosaur. So it looks like they were all dinosaur prints. That's the bad news. And everybody goes, oh, and people still get upset with me when I say don't use human dinosaur prints because it looks like they're all dinosaur prints. So that's the bad news. What's the good news? 3 words. Soft dinosaur tissue. Has anybody here not heard of the soft dinosaur tissue? Soft dinosaur what? Okay, so everybody here understands that there has been found numerous examples of soft dinosaur tissue. That is so much more, I think, significant than so-called human and dinosaur prints together. And guess what? We're finding more and more soft dinosaur tissue. That gets into, I could talk about that just for an hour or so, and I won't. But there is good articles in the ICR website, icr.org, that talks about soft dinosaur tissue. Then you had one other?
Yeah, just about carbon-14 dating, is that legitimate?
Yes, carbon-14 dating is legitimate because it's only good for thousands of years. So carbon-14 dating only has a half-time of thousands of years. Now here's what's significant. Speaking of soft dinosaur tissue, they found soft dinosaur tissue. That means it's rich in the element carbon. And so what creationists have been asking the evolutionists, such as Dr. Mary Schweitzer of South Carolina, the discovery of the first significant discovery of soft dinosaur tissue, would you please date that soft tissue using carbon-14 dating? And we've asked other evolutionists to please date the soft tissue with carbon-14 dating, and they go, what? They say, no. No, they refuse. And why do they refuse? Because carbon-14 dating is only good for thousands of years. Remember what the philosophy of uniformitarian evolution is. Dinosaurs became extinct when? 66 million years ago. So they must look at the soft, stretchy, collagenous tissue of a dinosaur and say, wow, it's lasted for at least 66 million years. I'm sorry, I've had a course called, well, I've had twice, histology, both as an undergraduate and as a graduate student. Histology is a study of tissues. I'm here to tell you, soft, stretchy, collagenous tissue doesn't even last a 500,000 years, let alone 66 plus million years. They've been finding some soft dinosaur tissue that's significantly older than 66 million years. And so, would they date that using carbon-14 dating, which is only good for thousands of years? No. 1,000 times no, we won't do that. So what to do? What you suppose we would do? Well, creationists went and looked in the fossil record to find our own soft dinosaur tissue. And guess what? We found it because it's ubiquitous. We find soft tissue all over the place now that we know where to look. And so what do? We take the soft tissue samples, making sure there's no contamination, and we submit those soft tissues to labs, C14 labs. And a good scientific process is you don't tell them what it is. You just say, I want you to date it using the technique and the technology that you have, and date this tissue and tell us how old it is according to carbon-14 dating. We don't tell them what it is. As a matter of fact, we don't even say where we're from. Because if you said, hi, my name is John Smith, I'm with the Institute for Creation, next! They won't even consider listening to anything else. And so we would go through a third party. And they submitted the tissue, and guess what? The results were thousands of years. So we presented the soft dinosaur tissue being dated by carbon-14 dating to the secular evolutionary community, and they go, wow, that's contamination. And so we submitted a second one. They go, wow, that's contamination. 12 times we submitted 12 different kinds of soft tissue, and guess what they said each and every time?
Wow.
It's all contaminated. Why did they say that? Because it was creationists doing the research, and everybody knows creationists are not scientific. So they must have contaminated each and every one of those samples. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. We have used the best, I could say, aseptic technique in order to make sure that there was no contamination. And so that's how it stands right now. We use carbon-14 dating, gives us a date of thousands of years. Not the biblical date, but it is a date of thousands of years, which is nothing close to the alleged millions and millions of years of the evolutionists. So I'm sorry, I got off the rabbit trail, but I had to mention that. We're just a few minutes before noon. Another question. Yes, sir.
So,
Nice and loud. My ears haven't popped from flying from Texas over to here.
You mentioned
I heard that.
somebody has found lithification that happened in as short a period as 35 years on the coast of Scotland. Did I see that?
Yes,
Given that, are there any creationist groups, or why aren't there any creationist groups trying to manufacture fossils because floods can form those fast?
Trying to manufacture
Fossils.
fossils. Boy, that would be very difficult to manufacture fossils, make fossils.
If it can be done fast.
Oh, if it could be defined. Oh, I see what you're saying. That is an excellent next step. If in this area in Scotland where this lady and her colleagues found this sedimentary rock lithifying in 35 years, could we not add an animal or two and see if this lithification process would include fossilization? And I'd say that'd be a great next step. Yeah, I'm not a paleontologist, but it seems logical to address that and to maybe see what would happen. So, good. I'm glad I thought of that. So thank you. I appreciate that. Good one. Okay.
quick question.
Yes.
On the line of catastrophism, is it changing textbooks yet?
Catastrophism is making its way into textbooks, but they're quick to add it's nothing to do with the Bible. All that they distance themselves from biblical interpretation, but they cannot avoid catastrophism because of what the Alvarez team did in the mid-1980s, the father-son team, and they're seeing evidence of catastrophism everywhere now. It's just like soft dinosaur tissue. They can't ignore it anymore. They can't ignore catastrophism anymore. So that's a good question. So we just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Any of you, be interesting to see if you ever hear that in college. What we have now, there's a 2-hour